So the rig I'm going to show you how to tie is known as a bait loop rig. Now this is not a rig that I've invented, it's been around for a very long time. I first saw it on a packet of Christ and hook link 25 years ago. It's not a hair rig, it's not a D rig, it's something in between the two. It offers certain advantages that neither of the other two rigs can really achieve, and that's what makes it interesting to me. Back-to-back takes in February, gotta love that. He's a chunky one as well. So what do we need? Well, first of all, we're going to need some hooks. My choice for this is a packet of the size 6 twisters. You could use any short shanked hook with an inturned eye. You could use a beak point if that's your thing, but massive fan of the twisters, very long sharp point, a very strong hook for their size as well. And this for me is the perfect hook for this rig. Next we're going to need some braid, and I'm going to use the 25-pound Armourlink. Could use the 35-pound for really kind of heavy work, but the 25-pound is plenty enough. I wouldn't ever advocate the use of a thin braid for carp fishing. I want a fairly thick, heavy braid because it helps protect the carp's mouth. It's important to get the ratio of the eye size to the diameter of braid correct. You'll probably struggle to get 35-pound braid through the eye of a size 6, so if you need to use 35-pound braid, then I'd probably advise going up to a size 5. But the combination of the size 6 with the 25-pound Armourlink works perfectly for me. So to start, I'm going to pass the braid from the inside of the hook to the outside of the hook and run the tag end down the back, and I'm going to pinch it there. I'm going to fold the tag end back on itself. I want to form a long enough loop so that when I pinch it up there by the eye, when I fold that loop over there, it gets to be around the middle distance there, halfway between the point and the shank. I can adjust that in the final stages, but that's close enough for the minute. Then I can pinch that there, and I'm going to whip the knotless knot over the top of both of those pieces. That's the join in the eye. I don't want to go over that first, so I'm going to go around the back. 1, 2, 3, 4, and by the time I've done 4 turns, we've got a bit of twist in the braid, so take that twist out just like that, and then another 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And with this material and these hooks, the braid is almost kind of perpendicular to the shank, being down to the point of the hook there. That's close enough. I could go one more if I wanted to. Now at that point there, I'm going to close those 2 fingers together to put a bit of tension on the braid. That frees this hand, and I can move my hand over there, pinch the knotless knot like that. Once I've done that, I can then take the braid and whip once, twice, underneath this little loop that we've formed. And this is where the rig gets its name from, because that's the bait loop. I pinch the whole lot together, and at this point now we can measure the length of the rig that we want. It's about 20 centimeters, and this is just the length of rig that I've chosen for this session. Could be shorter, could be longer. So I'm going to pass from the back of the eye to the front of the eye through there like that. If I went through that way, this rig would never work. So you've got to go that way. And the other thing you need to note, this little tag end here is going underneath this loop, so that when this loop goes tight over the top of it, it's pinching that and holding it really firmly in place like that. When you form this loop, you need to have this tag end away from you on the other side of the hook. If you do it the other way round, then you'll struggle to do this. So if this isn't working for you, it's because you set up for this wrong. It's at this point that we need to get the length of this bait loop right. You've got lots of options here. If this was going to be a pop-up rig, I wouldn't have that bait loop anywhere near that length, but I'm going to make this rig initially for a double 12mm bottom bait, and I want that to be in the middle there. That's a little bit short. Now before we finish off here, what we can do is, if we get a rig puller, and then without holding that, because that's going to give us pressure on there, if we just give that a light wiggle, there we go, extends that loop out. That's gone a little bit too far forward, nearly lost our tag in there. If we just tease that back a bit, there we go. That's perfect there for me. And then all we need to do is put a little blob on that. The pressure from the hook link is going to hold that very securely. It's underneath all those whips there, and it's all really secure, but I'd just like to add a little blob just a bit of extra security. So I'm going to use a little jet lighter to blob this. You have to be really careful when you're using these. You will not do this with a conventional lighter. Might even struggle today to do this because it's a little bit windy. There we go. You might not like the way that that is sticking out there. Personally, it doesn't bother me. If that bothers you, then what you can do is just put the rig puller in there again. Just give that a little tease down. There we go. And that's gone really, really neat. And you can see why it's important that the knotless knot goes across the top of that, just to fully anchor that down. Now you might be thinking, well, what this rig really needs now is a kicker, and it absolutely does not. For me, this rig is absolutely perfect as is. It does not need shrink tube, it does not need a kicker. If I were to put a kicker on here, I'm only going to be closing down the effective gape, and the effective gape is the distance between the hook point and this, and I want that to be as wide as possible. If I put a kicker on, the kicker would be to there, and you're closing off the point of this hook, and that's not what I want to do. I want that to be open like that, so it turns and grabs and nails the carp. And for me, that is exactly what this little rig is going to do. I see countless rigs on social media that if you only took the kicker away, they'd have a good rig. You're just ruining your rigs. You know, yes, you're going to catch a few carp, but for me, you catch an awful lot more if you ditch things like kickers. You don't need them. The next little addition I'm going to make to this rig, this is optional. If you want to add some weight to this rig, then my preference is to use something like an oval bead. These 6mm ones work perfectly. They come on these little threaders. If you got one of these threaders, then you just thread that on there like that, and then pull that off, and that threads it on. The reason why I like these 6mm oval beads over anything else, over any other shape of sinker that you can buy, is that you can move them from rig to rig. So that one has been on, well, it's probably 3 or 4 different rigs, and it's just come out in my little spares box here. And all you do to reuse it is you put it on a boilie needle. You must use a boilie needle. A gated latch needle is too large a diameter to do this trick. And then we just fold it over the needle like that and push the sinker on. And that grips the hook link beautifully. You can slide it down to wherever you want. I want it to be 3 or 4 centimeters from the hook eye, just like that, and that adds a lovely amount of weight just where I want it. The problem with using these barrel shaped sinkers is that they're very, very difficult to thread onto a needle like that, but because of the diameter of this oval bead, it's much fatter, and it's just really, really easy to use, and you can reuse these countless times. No more messing around with putty trying to get a perfect little round oval like that. Quick, easy, simple, reusable. Yeah, love them. So I've been using these cheap little foam rig boards to store these rigs, and this is how I'm storing the rig. Just ready, pre-cut like that. There's no bait mount on there like that, so I just take them on the board, pop them on there like that, set the sinker at the right distance, and they're all ready to go. They're all the same length, and they're all ready to be mounted up with a bait of any size and tied to a mainline swivel. So if we pop this off again, now in terms of connecting it to a mainline swivel, we got a few options. The way I've been doing it for this session is just to take a very basic size 8 swivel. This is not a ring swivel, this is just a bog standard normal size 8 swivel, and the reason why I like these is that you get twice as many in a packet. They're the cheapest form of swivel that you can buy. You could use a quick change swivel for sure. So the most simple and effective way of connecting the hook link to a mainline swivel is just to tie it on with a basic uni knot or a single grinner, and to do that we go through the swivel and then we come back to the swivel, or we form a loop, and then the tagging goes over the 2 strands like that, and then we simply whip through. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I left that tag end a little bit short, but I can just wheedle it through, pull on the tag end, and then slide the whole lot down. Now that is a very simple and effective and strong knot. We're just going to wet that down, little tweak with the teeth, and then pull that home. You could put a rig tool in there and just give it a final tweak, but to be honest, this material, it grips itself, it doesn't slip, so you really don't need to do that. If it was mono, yeah, I want to do it better than that, but for braid it really doesn't matter. The other classic mistake I see so many anglers making is they cut this tag end far too short. You don't want to cut it there. It might slip, especially if you haven't tightened that down enough. So cut it long. The carp don't care. 5mm, 6mm, 7mm, you want to be extra secure, then give it a little blob there. Now, you might hate that and think it looks horrible. Well, it really doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother the carp either. So you might be thinking, well, how on earth are you going to fit a 12mm bait? If I stick that on there, it's going to be incredibly tight to the hook. We're not going to do that. Yeah, we could put an extender stop on there, but I do not use extender stops. You don't need extender stops. What I'm going to do is actually mount the baits on the floss, and we're going to tie the floss to the bait loop. And this is the key difference between this and a conventional hair rig. Now, to do this next bit, you're going to need some bait floss. You could use some fine braid as well, or some thin mono, but just a bit of bait floss works really well. It doesn't have to be the Carpy brand, any bit of dental bait floss will do. If you're using small baits, you want to use a proper boilie needle and not a gated latch needle. A gated latch needle looks like that, and if you use one of those on a small bait like that, you run the risk of splitting the bait open, because when you push it through like that, you can see that that latch is going to slice open the bait quite considerably. Depending on how hard the bait is, or how dry the bait is, or what make of bait you buy, there's a chance that by the time you've done that and fiddled around, that bait is going to split. So for this next bit, I'm going to take some of the bait floss and I'm going to fold over a loop of about 10 centimeters long. Take the boilie needle and just hook the floss on like that, and individually slide those off the needle. If you push from there, there's a lot of force and you can actually split these baits if they're delicate enough. So just move them down separately like that. When we get to there, we can move them as a pair, pop the needle out, and then we can put a bait stop in. Now, you can get loads of different types of bait stops, but the style that you want are just the very simple straight ones like that. You don't want an extender stop or one with a hook on it. You want a straight one, and if you want to be really fussy, then you trim the ends off. Carp don't care what size the bait stop is, what colour the bait stop is. They really aren't bothered at all. But specifically, you want a straight style bait stop like that, and that's going to become evident when we go to rebait this loop in a bit. You might be bothered that the bait stop is sitting outside the bait, and can't the carp feel that? I've experimented with burying the bait stop and doing all sorts of things like that. It really doesn't matter. Next step is we need to even up the tag ends there, and what we're left with is 2 long tag ends of floss like that. Tie a simple overhand knot, a little granny knot, and we're just going to slide that down. And before this knot closes down, I'm going to insert the boilie needle back through and sit it on top of the baits like that. And then I do up this overhand knot. When I tighten up that knot, it forces a little gap to remain between the top of that loop and the bait. And I'm going to do 1 overhand knot over the top of it, and then that locks that loop at the right size. And when I remove that boilie needle, we are left with a tiny little loop there, and that's going to be important later. Now you've got these like this, you could, if you wanted to, put those in a dip pot or some glug or some liquid and keep them like this for a very long time actually. But I'm just going to tie this directly to this bait loop rig now. And to do that, we just take one of the tag ends, pass it through the loop, and we're going to do yet another overhand knot. The gravity on the hook there centralizes that loop so that when I tighten it down, the loop ends up right at the base of the loop there. That's what we want to achieve. 1 more over the top again to secure it. And then again, we're just going to blob these. So there we go. That's the finished rig. And you might be saying, well, you know, that's just a hair rig. It is, but it isn't. It's done in a different manner. We're using a really strong, thick and robust material, so using this bait floss and using it in this manner means that there is no knot inside the bait. If I was to do a conventional hair rig and with this material and pull, that knot inside a 12mm bait. I'm just going to split it open. So this is a perfect little rig if you want to use small baits, and using small baits in the winter over particle is a very effective method, and this is why I'm using it specifically for this session. Wow, well that didn't take long. There's the middle rod that's just ripped off, and that was just on the little PVA bag. This is one seriously angry common, this. He's led me a bit of a merry dance. Come on mate, you know you want to. So there we go, that's what's done the business. 2 12mm citrus, running inline lead. Pickup indicator is out there, obviously because we've caught a fish, and I can see the point of the hook is gone over. We won't be using that again, but that's alright. Absolutely deadly, simple and effective. Well, it's lovely fish this, and that little bait loop rig, he was absolutely nailed right in the middle of the bottom lip. Just cast out into the middle. Tiny little PVA mesh bag, and that's all you need really. Bait in the right place. Yeah, he's ripped off within about an hour. Didn't take long at all. Banging conditions, water's still cold, still sub 10 degrees water temperature. They're starting to think about having a little munch. So one of the reasons why I'm using this supple little rig is I wanted to fish over some of the slightly softer spots, and I wanted to do it with an inline rig as well. And I just love the way a supple rig works with an inline lead. Works from a boat, works when you cast. You have to be careful when you cast it, but it works really well. I'm not fishing over really deep silt, I'm just fishing off the spot, either left or short or right, but not on the really hard stuff, just away from it a bit. And the silt there is still really nice and soft and light and fluffy, full of life, full of oxygen, full of natural food as well, and it's a natural place for the carp to want to feed early season. They're going to be having a grub around, they're going to be looking for food. So this is fish number 2. Oh, hello. I've just had a bang
on the blue.
I've just had a bang on the blue. Whew. Back-to-back takes in February, gotta love that. That was about 300 grams worth of particles and pellet. No boilie in there at all, just a really simple winter mix. Garlic, wheat, hemp, some tiger nuts flush, some of our veggie pellets, and that trap has been out 2 hours, 2.5 hours now. It's another common. Look at that. Oh, he swam straight in the net. I thought it was a mirror. Back-to-back commons. He's a chunky one as well. You gotta love them apples. That's a big common, that. Boy. Right, tiger. That could well be a 40-pound common, that. There we go. Absolute. Oh, bump. Beautiful. Tiny rig, tiny bait for a massive carp. Get plenty of comments on social media. Anglers can't wrap their head around how a running rig can possibly hook a carp if it swims back to you. Well, that carp, absolutely, that was a drop back bite. But I think the way it happens is that they go away from you, then they change their mind and then swim back towards you. Anyway, we had a flurry of beeps, and then 2-3 minutes passed, and then we had a big drop back, and then I wound in and connected. So I think the carp was probably on there for all those minutes, just trying to do the rig, move away, and in the end he just gave himself away, and I wound down and hit it, and he's in the back of the net. This is a big old carp, wily old carp, an original fish, and he's seen a few rigs and he wasn't splitting that one. 43 10. 43.10. What a cracker. So how would you go about rebaiting this rig? Do we have to do it all again from scratch? Well, no, and that's why I was very specific about using this boiling needle to create a very small little loop here. So if these baits had been in the water, they would be a bit cracked and split. There we go. Slide those baits off, and we can take our floss and we just open up the loop there, hook it on the needle, thread them on individually. You get to about that point there, and we just rotate the needle like that, and very carefully we just want to give a little bit of pressure, and we just want to make that loop big enough to get the bait stop. And this is why I did the little loop at the other end, because with that little loop it is just big enough to pop the bait stop through like that, and you'll see that that knot didn't go inside that top bait, because if that knot goes inside that top bait, it's going to split that top bait apart and it's going to ruin our double bottom bait presentation. That's what that tiny little loop does there. It just enables us enough distance there to put those baits on without having to tie a new hair. And this is why I'm using specifically a straight style bait stop like that. If that was an extender stop, it's not going to work because you have to pull the extender stop inside. So if you follow the way I've built, this enables you to reuse the bait floss multiple times. We're reusing the rig as well. We have to be very sure that this hook is razor sharp, because if that hook gets damaged in any way and I can't resharpen it, then the whole rig has to be redone. Another reason why I like this presentation, we're using a loop of this material rather than just a single strand to connect the baits. And this loop means that it's stiffer. It's twice as stiff as a supple hair rig will be. This gives us some advantages in terms of anti-tangle properties, so that when I do that, it's less likely for the hook and the baits to wrap around the hair. Because we're using floss here, we've got more flexibility in the floss. If you want a really flexible connection there, then you should leave a little gap there. Just like that, when I turn those baits, the hook is still hanging down. So we've got a nice amount of pivot there, but this loop stays quite rigid. And I quite like that. I haven't had any of these rigs come back tangled, even when I've fluffed the cast, even when I haven't hit the clip properly at short range. I'm only casting these 50 yards range maximum. These rigs are perfect for short to medium range. You can use them in a bushwhacker, you can use them in a bait boat, you can drop them from a rowing boat. And that's the reason why I'm using this little rig, because I'm only fishing short range and I'm doing some rowing boat work and I'm doing some baiting pole work as well. And I can use the same rig for all of those different options. So I'm only using one rig. I really don't like having to use different rigs for different spots, because it gives me complete flexibility in terms of what I do, when and how, if I'm just using one rig that can do it all. There's no way that I want to be taking these rigs out to the river or a large public reservoir where I'm casting 100, 120 yards. Completely unsuitable for that sort of work. Unless you put them in a solid PVA bag, you know, you can do that and you can fish then basically at any range you can cast. Now, to put these tiny baits in comparison, we'll get a couple of donkey chokers out. Now, the other reason why I love this little rig is because this rig can fish with one or even two of those, and I don't have to change the rig. All I have to do is remount them with some floss. Now, because these baits are much bigger baits, I'm going to need to use more floss, so about 15 centimetre loop of floss. Slide one of those on there, and just to go to the absolute extreme, we'll put two on. I caught carp as small as mid doubles on 24mm baits. Carp have got absolutely massive mouths. If you're fishing a water and you're getting plagued by bream, my starting point would be double 24mm bottom baits, because the bream are going to have a very hard job choking a pair of those down. Because I set that loop length as long as I did, it means that I can use that rig for a single 12mm, double 12mm, right up to double 24, and I don't have to tie a new rig. That's the same rig, same length of loop, and yet we've gone from double 12 to double 24 and nothing else has changed. It's just the length of the floss, and I can still change these baits just as easily as I did last time. Double 12mm citrus, perfect for a bite in the winter when conditions are hard, fishing over particles in the summer, anything like that. Fishing a water with some massive bream in, how on earth can you use a size 6 with double 24mm? Well, I do, absolutely no problem, works great. Using the size 6 with double 12s, yeah, again, not a problem, works great. You can use any size of baits, 12s, 15s, 18s, 20s, anything in between. You can use tiger nuts, you can use sweet corn, you can use maize, anything you want with this simple little rig. So if you're pre-tight all your rigs like that, you can basically turn those rigs to do anything. So you can tie a load up in advance and just go fishing and be confident that you can deal with a wide range of situations. So why should you use this bait loop rig as opposed to something like the blowback multi, which is another similar supple braided rig? Well, the blowback multi has the massive advantage that you can quickly change hooks. So if you're fishing a very rocky venue and hook points are going over pretty much every chuck, then the blowback multi is a great option. The big downside with a blowback multi, you can't cast it with a PVA mesh bag attached, hooked on to the hook, which is a very common and popular method. Why? Because it's easy. I use it all the time. This bait loop rig is perfect for just hooking on a little stick or a little PVA mesh bag or a stringer or anything like that. You can hook on any small PVA bait package, just nick it onto the hook, cast it as far as you feel comfortable with, land the rig, and it'll be fishing perfectly for you. So for short to medium range, that makes it a very effective choice. The downside of using a supple braided rig like this bait loop rig is the fact that you're going to have to pay particular attention to hook sharpness. And once that hook is done, the rig is done. If you can't resharpen the hook, then you chop the rig up and you're going to have to tie a new one. For me, the key benefit with this rig is the fact that with one rig, I can mount any bait or any number of baits of any sizes, and I'm still using the same rig. So I can have all the same rigs and then make them do different things for different situations at different times. And that's really powerful. I had a ridiculous result last night. Kicked off at 8:30 with a 44-pound mirror, slipped that back, and then I had a 54-12. Ridiculous fishing. And the rod that's just gone was the one that did the bite with a 54. And one of the great advantages with a rig design like this is that you can just sit down at a rig table and tie a few of these up, and you haven't got to think about, well, this rig is going to be for this and this rig is going to be for this. You just tie the same rig and you put them on your board, and when you get fishing you can decide, all right, well, I'm going to fish with double 12mm today. Because you separate the rig tying from the bait installation, you can make that decision on the fly. So the only bait option that this rig can't switch between is a bottom bait to a pop-up. You need a different size loop length, or well, put it this way, I prefer much shorter length of bait loop if I'm going to fish this in a pop-up configuration. So what we're talking about here is the length of this loop, and that looks to be about 4mm long to me, and that is perfect. The pop-up can be attached straight to that and it will sit lovely. It's going to balance this rig very nicely. So that's a bait loop rig that's designed for a pop-up, and it's sat next to these other ones with much longer loops. You could tie these on externally with a pop-up, of course, but it's a little bit fiddly. I prefer to pierce them myself. You could just cut and blob this. That's another option. So I'm still going to use my little boilie needle trick here, just so that we can put a fresh pop-up on if we wanted to. So that's how the pop-up would sit, and you can see that if I'd have done a long bait loop rig there, the pop-up would be a long way away from the shank of that hook. Right, let's knock up another one. Well, 3 12mm baits, triple small baits. Quite a difficult rig for the carp to eject, actually. It's a very, very different shaped rig, and anything that the carp struggle to eject is a good thing. So I know I'm going to get some questions on, well, Matt, why don't you use extender stops? Well, let's have a go at using an extender stop for these little rigs and see what goes on. Can you use a bait extender to go from a 12mm bait to a 15mm bait? I'm going to get to that point there, and all of a sudden these knots are going to start disappearing up into the boilie. And the whole point of this little rig is that I don't have to break open the bait or run the risk of splitting the bait by having knots going inside the boilie. So I'm not a massive fan of that for a start. So I have to pull quite hard until I just pop out the loop there. So I can get a 2mm extender stop, hook that on there. The extender stops, they can split the baits if the bait is too dry, so you've got a risk of splitting here. You've got a risk of splitting here. I'm not saying it doesn't work, it's just that you can't go from something like a double 12mm bait to a double 15mm bait. Even if you've got some 6mm extender stops, they're only 6mm long. If I used a 6mm extender stop here, I could put an 18mm bait on, sure, but I still couldn't go from double 12 to double 18 or something. Extender stops just weren't made for that. So extender stops have their limitations. When I'm using this rig, I only need those. So if you only want to use one style of bait stop, just use that one. So one of the key advantages of this little bait loop rig is that you can use a heavy hook link, in this case 25-pound Armourlink, with really small delicate baits. I'm going to mount up some sweetcorn, but you could use really tiny boilies or some tiger nuts. One of the problems with using baits like sweetcorn is that they're really quite delicate. If you've ever tried to hair rig corn on a heavy duty hook link, it's not easy. The knot in the hair can literally bust the baits apart. But with this little rig, there's no knot to do that. You can make this stack as big as you want, really. Problem with sweetcorn is that everything loves it, so a couple of grains of corn is just going to catch you a nice specimen roach, but Mr. Roach is going to have a problem swallowing that lot. And we just fold over a decent length like that, 10 centimetres. You don't want to crush the grains. If you crush the grains, they're a bit useless, really. One of these little flat stops will do the minimum damage to the corn. And then it's another overhand knot to meet up with the other overhand knot. And you want that knot to close up in the base of the loop there like that. So that's gone perfect. And then the knot doesn't disappear inside. And we don't have to put any force on the sweetcorn. Lob the tag ends. Perfect little corn rig. 6 grains of corn. Using baits like sweetcorn is a really simple and effective alternative to boilies. Not very good for night fishing, things like that, but if you're only doing day sessions, then just grab a can of corn. It really is very effective, but you've got to learn to respect it because it is very delicate. And a perfect mix to go with this little sweetcorn rig. I've got some garlic wheat here that I've cooked up, some nice grains of corn and some hemp. I am going to row this out and get it exactly where I want it. It's the same effect as using a bait boat. If I was fishing at closer range, I wouldn't need the rowing boat. Some of these rigs I'm dropping at 90 yards range, so you know, I really do need the rowing boat to put them in position. That's just because of the nature of this lake and where I'm going to get a pickup. You can cast this little rig, no problem doing that. Right, there we go. Just make sure that the rig is not impaled on a grain of corn to start with. That's the only risk of doing that. So why should you choose this rig over a mono rig? Well, it all depends on what you're trying to do. I think it's very easy for anglers to get sucked into this belief that, you know, rig A is better than rig B and that will always be the case. I don't really think of rigs like that. I think of, well, that rig works in that situation and it's going to work better in that situation than rig B. So if I'm in situation A, then use rig A. That's the way I kind of gauge rigs. So let's look at it in terms of when should you use a supple rig and when should you use a mono rig. Supple rigs are great if you need to fish over a variety of bottom types. If you're fishing a small, spotty, intricate lake similar to my own estate lake here in France, then this is a great choice. We haven't got any weed here, but we've got all sorts of bottom types. We've got sand, we've got clay, we've got gravel, we've got some rocky areas as well, and everything in between. It's complicated and spotty. And wherever you've got big catfish, you need a very robust hook link material. Now, you can achieve a robust hook link with mono, but you have to go to 0.50, maybe even 0.60. And when you get up to those type of dimensions, you lose the suppleness of the rig. Now, that's okay if you want a stiffer rig. If you're fishing with a swivel based lead system, then using heavy duty mono hook link is an excellent choice. It's something I do a lot in my river carping and in my public lake fishing because it suits that type of work. When I'm working with guests that come and fish this lake, the easiest thing for me to do is to set them up with a running inline lead system. It's just less complicated. You need less bits to create a simple, effective running inline lead system than you do a safe and effective swivel-based running lead system. So an inline lead system is very appropriate for the lake. So it's a perfect combination. Supple rigs partner very well with inline lead systems, no matter how you're putting them into position, casting, solid bags, boat work, baiting pole work, they work. I wouldn't want to take a supple braided rig with an inline lead, take it down the reservoir and try and cast 100 yards. It's not going to happen. I'm certainly not going to make that sort of distance, and even if I did get that range, then it's probably going to be laying on the bottom in a tangled heap. It's not appropriate to that type of fishing. If you just started out in the sport, then my default advice, my go-to advice is just stick to mono rigs to start with. The mono hair, the mono D, master those, use those, because they're simple and effective most of the time and will suit most of the situations. You know, 12 pound or 15 pound mainline and use the same material for hook link, great. Stick to that, it'll serve you really well. Once you're really confident with those rigs and you want to explore supple rigs, then this is a great option. You need to have that foundation to start with. I wouldn't really be recommending this rig as a, go anywhere and be suitable for anyone, because you need to be able to cast well. If you're casting this rig, you have to be able to feather the lead, trap the lead and land the rig. If your casting is not at that level, then I would never recommend a supple braided rig, because it's not going to be effective. It's not going to catch you carp consistently. If you're relatively new to the sport but you're using a bait boat, then the tine of this rig you feel comfortable with that, then great. Mono is much more tangle resistant when you're casting it than a supple braid. You have to be careful when you're casting a supple braid. It's just the price that you pay. So all I've put out is that cereal mix, bit of cereal pellet and some of the mixed cereals. What am I going to fish over the top? Well, in terms of boilie, all I'm going to use is a double 12mm citrus mounted on that little bait loop rig, and in the PVA mesh bag I'm going to use a single citrus and a tiny little amount of 2mm pellet. So a really small amount of bait, but a very attractive bait. It was enough to get me a bite last night with absolutely nothing else around it whatsoever. So at the end of the day, all you really need is a bait in the right place at the right time. In terms of getting the rigs in position, the one I'm going to fish off the end of the island, I'm just going to cast that one because I'm very confident of being able to hit my 10 wrap mark. The one that I've put up on the dam wall, I'm going to have to row that out and place it by hand. If I had my bait boat available, then I would drive it out and drop it. I'm just going to row it out. There's no way that I can cast that up that margin, not with a southerly wind. I'll just string the lead up the tree, so it's completely pointless. So to get a rig out accurately over that cereal mix that I've put in, I need to wrap up. And I'm just going to use some distance sticks here. Could use a couple of bank sticks, but anything to get me exactly out to the distance that I need. 10, that is 10 12-foot wraps. So despite the fact that I'm using a 9-foot rod, I still count in 12-foot wraps because it makes sense to me. So that's the little rig I'm using, this little bait loop rig. I'm now going to pop that in some glug, and that'll give it time to soak in some extra flavour for a couple of hours before we actually get it into play. So if you do want to make up a little particle mix like this and use it with a baiting pole like a bushwhacker or a bait boat, one thing you can do, if you put your wet mix in first and then put some dry pellets over the top, you don't need many, the pellets are there for a bit of extra attraction and to protect the rig. And what this enables you to do is you can put the rig in, leg goes in the front there like that, and you can still use a little PVA mesh bag just to help the descent, control the descent, add a little bit of extra attraction. And it's the pellets that are preventing the particle mixture from melting that PVA. And if you've got any juice or liquid you want to put on. That's just a bit of the matching plume juice there. Just get it on that bag. It's just all about getting some extra flavour. But if you don't sit the PVA mesh bag onto some dry pellet, you're going to melt the PVA mesh bag. And the reason why I want to put the 2mm pellets in a PVA mesh bag, 2mm pellets are very light, and I want them down on the spot. I want them around my rig. I don't want them floating over a wide area. These 6mm pellets will go over a wide area. That's fine. That's what the particle mix and the pellets are for. But the little 2mm pellets, highly attractive, right over the rig. So that's how I do it. Now, for some of you, you might think, well, that's an awful lot of bait, isn't it, Matt? Well, if I was just fishing blind, then yeah, it would be. But I know they're eating, I know they've woken up a bit, and these conditions are only going to turn them on more. So just based on my previous experience, and I know just what a tremendous amount of food these carp can eat when they do switch on, that a little trap like that, it's only 200, 300 gram, it's really not a lot. Nothing to these fish. We've got 1.3 tonne of carp here, and when they find you, one fish can clear that in 10 minutes. Just drift them in and bombs away. Be very, very careful to manage the line off the spool, because the wind is just blowing me back to the bank here and the line's ticking off. We're 20 metres away from the spot already. So this is why I like to use a bigger lead when I'm doing this type of work. I'm fishing just off the end of that island there, so obviously I'm using a semi-tight clutch. I'm always using a semi-tight clutch, but just want to make sure that they're going to have to work really hard. There we go. To make any headway. Put line in the line clip there. Receiver on. R4 on. There we go, ready to rock. It's virtually impossible to not to have a massive bow in the line with the wind blowing right to left, line perpendicular to that. All I can do in this situation is slide a back lead on, try and get the back lead in line with the rod tip and the spot, and then just gradually tighten up and allow the bow to come out. If you think you're going to do slack lining in these kind of conditions, you're living in a dream world. On a big public lake I'd just fish bowstring tight, but night fishing here I always prefer to fish over the top of back-leaded lines. It does come with its risks, but I've gotten used to it here really.